everyone, welcome back to the Pages of the Globe, and today I'm going to be reading to you the short story Games at Twilight by Anita Desai. Now, before we get started, I do want to let you know that I've kind of changed my style of these videos. So first, as always, I will talk to you about the author, give you a very brief summary of the story, and then at the end, we'll do kind of an analysis. Because I know before we used to do an analysis before the story, but we could never really dig deep as that would spoil the story for y'all. So this way, I can kind of show the story and then together we can discuss the subplots and like kind of really pick at each and every little line. So first, I will be talking about the author, Anita Desai. Now, Anita Desai is an Indian novelist and the Emerita John E. Butcherd Professor of Humanities at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, or MIT. Now, as a writer, she has been shortlisted for the Booker Prize 3 times and received a Sahitya Akademi Award in 1978 for her novel Fire on the Mountain from the Sahitya Akademi, India's National Academy of Letters. She won the British Guardian Prize for The Village by the Sea in 1983, and her other works include The Peacock, Voices in the City, Fire on the Mountain, and an anthology of short stories, Games at Twilight. She is on the advisory board of the Lalit Kala Academy and a fellow of the Royal Society of Literature in London. Which, interesting about that is, first of all, it's like a very, very, very prestigious thing to be a fellow. And once you are, allowed in, whenever people write your name, you first do have, you are entitled to the use of the post-nominal letters FRSL, which is really cool. And there were a lot of great writers, specifically international writers, who are part of this society. Now, continuing on to the story, Games at Twilight, I will be picking the title story from, as I said before, her anthology of short stories, Games at Twilight, which is honestly one of my favorite kind of series, because basically this collection features very vividly the sights and sounds of daily Indian life. So whenever you read these short stories, you can kind of connect it back to how daily Indian life used to be, specifically in these are certain villages, and Desai actually uses her own personal background for most of these stories, as she had a German-born mother and then a Bengali-speaking father. So she has her own kind of special background, which she likes to weave into these stories. So it makes them pretty interesting. Now, without further ado, let's get on with the story. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment down below which short story you would like to read next. Games at Twilight by Anita Desai. It was still too hot to play outdoors. They had had their tea, they had been washed, and had their hair brushed, and after the long day of confinement in the house that was not cool, but at least a protection from the sun, the children strained to get out. Their faces were red and bloated with the effort, but their mother would not open the door. Everything was still curtained and shuttered in a way that stifled the children, made them feel that their lungs were stuffed with cotton wool and their noses with dust, and if they didn't burst out into the light and see the sun and feel the air, they would choke. "Please, Ma, please," they begged. "We'll play in the veranda and porch. We won't go a step out of the porch." "You will, I know you will." And then, "No, we won't. They wailed so horrendously that she actually let down the bolt of the front door, so that they burst out like seeds from a crackling, overripe pod into the veranda, with such wild, maniacal yells that she retreated to her bath and the shower of talcum powder and the fresh sari that were to help her face the summer evening. They faced the afternoon. It was too hot, too bright. The white walls of the veranda glared stridently in the sun. The bougainvillea hung about it, purple and magenta and livid balloons. The garden outside was like a tray made of beaten brass, flattened out on the red gravel and the stony soil in all shades of metal, aluminum, tin, copper, and brass. No life stirred at this arid time of day. The birds still drooped like dead fruit, in the papery tents of the trees. Some squirrels lay limp on the wet earth underneath the garden tap. The outdoor dog lay stretched as if dead on the veranda mat, his paws and ears and tail all reaching out like dying travelers in search of water. He rolled his eyes at the children, 2 white marbles rolling in the purple sockets, begging for sympathy, and attempted to lift his tail in a wag, but could not. It only twitched and lay still. Then, perhaps, roused by the shrieks of the children, a band of parrots suddenly fell out of the eucalyptus tree, tumbled frantically in the still, sizzling air, then sorted themselves out into battle formation and streaked away across the white sky. The children, too, felt released. They, too, began tumbling, shoving, pushing against each other, frantic to start. Start what? Start their business. The business of the children's day, which is play. Let's play hide and seek. Who'll be it? You be it. Why should I? You be. You're the eldest. That doesn't mean... The shove became harder. Some got kicked out. The motherly Mira intervened. She pulled the boys roughly apart. There was a tearing sound of cloth, but it was lost in the heavy panting and angry grumbling, and no one paid attention to the small sleeve hanging loosely off a shoulder. Make a circle, she shouted, firmly pulling and pushing till a kind of vague circle was formed. Now clap, she roared. And clapping, they all chanted in a melancholy unison, dip, dip, my blue ship. And every now and then one or the other saw he was safe, and by the way his hands fell at the crucial moment, palm on palm or back of hand on palm, dropped out of the circle with a yell and a jump of relief and jubilation. Raghu was it. He started to protest, cry, You cheated! Mira cheated! Anu cheated! It was too late. The others had already streaked away. There was no one to hear when he called out, Only in the veranda! The porch! Ma said to stay in the porch. No one stopped to listen. All he saw were their brown legs flashing through the dusty shrubs, scrambling up brick walls, leaping over compost heaps and hedges, and then the porch stood empty in the purple shade of the bougainvillea. And the garden was as empty as before. Even the limp squirrel had whisked away, leaving everything gleaming, brassy, and bare. Only small Manu suddenly reappeared, as if he had dropped out of an invisible cloud or from a bird's claws, and stood for a moment in the center of the yellow lawn, chewing his finger, and near to tears as he saw Raghu shouting with his head pressed against the veranda wall. 83, 85, 89, 90, and then made off in a panic, half of him wanting to fly north, the other half counseling south. Raghu turned just in time to see the flash of his white shorts and the uncertain skittering of his red sandals, and charged after him with such a blood-curdling yell that Manu stumbled over the hosepipe, fell into its rubber coils, and lay there weeping. I won't be it. You have to find them all. I know I have to, idiot, Raghu said superciliously, kicking him with his toe. You're dead, he said with satisfaction, licking the beads of perspiration off his upper lip, then stalked off in search of worthier prey, whistling spiritedly so that the hiders should fear and tremble. Ravi heard the whistling and picked his nose in a panic, trying to find comfort by burrowing the finger deep, deep into that soft tunnel. He felt himself too exposed, sitting on an upturned flower pot behind the garage. Where could he burrow? He could run around the garage if he heard Raghu come, around and around, but he hadn't much faith in his short legs when matched against Raghu's long, hefty, hairy footballer legs. Ravi had a frightening glimpse of them as Raghu combed the hedge of the crotons and the hibiscus, trampling delicate ferns underfoot as he did. Ravi looked about him desperately, swallowing a small ball of snot in his fear. The garage was locked with a great heavy lock to which the driver had the key in his room, hanging from a nail on the wall under his work shirt. Ravi had peeped in and seen him, still sprawling on a string cot in his vest and striped underpants, the hair on his chest and the hair on his nose shaking with the vibrations of his phlegm-obstructed snores. Ravi had wished he were tall enough, big enough to reach the key on the nail, but it was impossible beyond his reach for years to come. He had sidled away and sat dejectedly on the flower pot. That at least was cut to his own size. But next to the garage was another shed with a big green door, also locked. No one even knew who had the key to the lock. The shed wasn't open more than once a year, when Ma turned out all the broken bits of furniture and rolls of matting and leaking buckets, and the white anthills were broken and swept away, and Flip sprayed into the spider webs and rat holes, so that the whole operation was like the looting of a poor, ruined, and conquered city. The green leaves of the doors sagged. They were nearly off their rusty hinges. The hinges were large enough and made a small gap between the door and the walls, only large enough for rats, dogs, and possibly Ravi to slip through. Ravi had never cared to enter such a dark and depressing mortuary of defunct household goods seething with such unspeakable and alarming animal life. But as Raghu's whistling grew angrier and sharper and his crashing and storming in the hedge wilder, Ravi suddenly slipped off the flower pot and through the crack and was gone. He chuckled aloud with astonishment at his own temerity, so that Raghu came out of the hedge, stood silent with his hands on his hips, listening, and finally shouted, "I heard you, I'm coming, got you," and came charging round the garage, only to find the upturned flower pot, the yellow dust, the crawling of white ants in a mud hill against the closed shed door. Nothing. Snarling, he bent to pick up a stick and went off, whacking it against the garage and shed walls as if to beat out his prey. Ravi shook, then shivered with delight, with self-congratulation, also with fear. It was dark, spooky in the shed. It had a muffled smell as if of graves. Ravi had once got locked in the linen cupboard and sat there weeping for half an hour before he was rescued. But at least that had been a familiar place, and even smelled pleasantly of starch, laundry, and reassuringly of his mother. But this shed smelled of rats, anthills, and dust, and spider webs. Also of less definable, less recognizable horrors. And it was dark. Except for the white, hot cracks along the door, there was no light. The roof was very low. Although Ravi was small, he felt as if he could reach up and touch it with his fingertips. But he didn't stretch. He hunched himself into a ball so as not to bump into anything, touch anything, or feel anything. What might there not be to touch him and feel him as he stood there, trying to see in the dark? Something cold or slimy, like a snake. Snakes! He leapt up as Raghu whacked the wall with his stick. Then, quickly realizing what it was, felt almost relieved to hear his stick. It made him feel protected. But Raghu soon moved away. There wasn't a sound once his footsteps had gone around the garage and disappeared. Ravi stood frozen inside the shed. Then he shivered all over. Something had tickled the back of his neck. It took him a while to pick up the courage to lift his head and explore. It was an insect, perhaps a spider, exploring him. He squashed it and wondered how many more creatures were watching him, wanting to reach out and touch him, the stranger. There was nothing now. After standing in that position, his hand still on his neck, feeling the wet splodge of the squashed spider gradually dry, for minutes, hours, his legs began to tremble with the effort, the inaction. By now he could see enough in the dark to make out the large solid shapes of old wardrobes, broken buckets, and bedsteads piled on top of each other around him. He recognized an old bathtub. Patches of enamel glittered at him, and at last he lowered himself onto its edge. He contemplated slipping out of the shed and into the fray. He wondered if it would not be better to be captured by Raghu and be returned to the milling crowd, as long as he could be in the sun, the light, the free spaces of the garden, and the familiarity of his brothers, sisters, and cousins. It would be evening soon. Their games would be legitimate. Their parents would sit out on the lawn on cane basket chairs and watch them as they tore around the garden, or gathered in knots to share a loot of mulberries or black, teetering, splitting jamun from the garden trees. The gardener would fix the hose pipe to the water tap, and water would fall lavishly to the air, to the ground, soaking the dry yellow grass and the red gravel and arousing the sweet, the intoxicating scent of water on dry earth. that loveliest scent in the world. Ravi sniffed for a whiff of it. He half rose from the bathtub, then heard the despairing scream of one of the girls as Raghu bore down upon her. There was the sound of a crash, of a rolling about in the bushes, the shrubs, the screams and accusing sobs of, "I touched the den." "You did not." "I did." "You liar, you did not." And then a fading away and silence again. Ravi sat back on the harsh edge of the tub, deciding to hold out a bit longer. What fun if they were all found and caught, he alone left unconquered. He had never known that sensation. Nothing more wonderful had ever happened to him than being taken out by an uncle and bought a whole slab of chocolate all to himself, or being flung into the soda man's pony cart and driven up to the gate by a friendly driver with red beard and pointed ears. To defeat Raghu, that hirsute, hoarse-voiced football champion, and to be the winner in a circle of older, bigger, luckier children, that would be thrilling beyond imagination. He hugged his knees together and smiled to himself, almost shyly at the thought of so much victory, such laurels. There he sat smiling, knocking his heels against the bathtub, now and then getting up and going to the door to put his ear to the broad crack and listening for sounds of the game, the pursuer and the pursued, and then returning his seat with the dogged determination of a true winner, the breaker of records, a champion. It grew darker in the shed as the light at the door grew softer, fuzzier, turned to a kind of crumbling yellow pollen that turned to yellow fur, blue fur, gray fur, evening, twilight, the sound of water gushing, falling, the scent of earth receiving water, slaking its thirst in great gulps, and releasing that green scent of freshness, coolness. Through the crack, Ravi saw the long purple shadows of the shed and the garage lying still across the yard. Beyond that, the white walls of the house, the bougainvillea, had lost its lividity, hung in the dark bundles that quaked and twittered and seethed with the masses of homing sparrows. The lawn was shut off from his view. Could he hear the children's voice? It seemed to him that he could. It seemed to him that he could hear them chanting, singing, laughing. But what about the game? What had happened? Could it be over? How could it when he had still not found? It was then occurred to him that he could have slipped out long ago, dashed across the yard to the veranda and touched the den. It was necessary to do that to win. He had forgotten. He had only remembered the part of hiding and tried to elude the seeker. He had done that so successfully, his success had occupied him so wholly that he had forgotten that the success had to be clinched by that final dash to victory and the ringing cry of, "Den!" With a whimper, he burst through the crack, fell on his knees, got up and stumbled on stiff, benumbed legs across the shadowy yard. Crying heartily by time, he reached the veranda so that when he flung himself at the white pillar and bawled, "Den! Den! Den!" his voice broke with rage and pity at the disgrace of it all. And then he felt himself flooded with tears and misery. Out on the lawn, the children stopped chanting. They all turned to stare at him in amazement. Their faces were pale and triangular in the dusk. The trees and bushes around them stood inky and spherical, spilling long shadows across them. They stared, wondering at his reappearance, his passion, his wild animal howling. Their mother rose from her basket chair and came towards him, worried, annoyed, saying, stop it, Ravi. Don't be a baby. Have you hurt yourself?" Seeing him attended to, the children went back to clasping their hands and chanting, "The grass is green, the rose is red." But Ravi would not let them. He tore himself out of his mother's grasp and pounded across the lawn into their midst, charging at them with his head lowered so that they scattered in surprise. I won, I won, I won, he bawled, shaking his head till the big tears flew. "Raghu didn't find me, I won, I won." It took them a minute to grasp what he was saying, even who he was. They had quite forgotten him. Raghu had found all the others long ago. There had been a fight about who was to be next. It had been so fierce that their mother had emerged from her bath and made them change to another game. Then they had played another and another, broken mulberries from the tree and eaten them, helped the driver wash the car when their father returned from work, helped the gardener water the beds till he roared at them and swore he would complain to the parents. The parents had come out, taken their positions at the cane chairs. They had begun to play again, sing and chant. All this time, no one had remembered Ravi. Having disappeared from the scene, he had disappeared from their minds, clean. "Don't be a fool," Raghu said roughly, pushing him aside. And even Mira said, "Stop howling, Ravi. If you want to play, you can stand at the end of the line." And she put him there very firmly. The game proceeded. 2 pairs of arms reached up and met in an arc. The children trooped under it again and again in a circle, ducking their heads and intoning, "The grass is green, the rose is red, remember me when I am dead." And the arc of thin arms trembled in the twilight. Their heads were bowed so sadly, their feet trampled to that melancholy refrain so mournfully, so helplessly, that Ravi could not bear it. He would not follow them. He would not be included in this funeral grain. He had wanted victory and triumph, not a funeral. But he had been forgotten, left out, and he would not join them now. The ignominy of being forgotten. How could he face it? He felt his heart go heavy and ache inside him so unbearably. He lay down full length on the damp grass, crushing his face into it, no longer crying, silenced by a terrible sense of his insignificance. The end. Okay, so that was a pretty great story, and yeah, let's get on with the analysis. So just to review, this Games at Twilight tells the story of Ravi, a young boy who is not understood by his family and feels often ignored, as he is surrounded by so many cousins and siblings and is often overshadowed by their accomplishments. The theme of childhood and its many facets is central to this tale, and while innocence and disappointment and the ups and downs of that conflicted period of life is also examined throughout the story. Now, one of the main themes I kind of want to focus on at first is social hierarchy, because at the beginning, when they start playing, you can kind of tell who is where at this kind of social circle. So, first off, you have Raghu, who is kind of like the leader. He's admired, he's everyone knows him, he's big, he's strong, and most importantly, he's the eldest. So he is automatically kind of the leader. Next, you have Mira, who's kind of like the mother of the group, and she's the one that kind of breaks up the fight and comes up with a diplomatic way to choose who becomes the first quote-unquote it. And then there's Manu, who is, he's just like a little kid. He's the youngest, and he has no idea where to hide, and he just starts crying. So he's kind of like the weak link, and that's why Raghu easily catches him. Now, this game kind of evokes the characteristics and roles that the children already have within their own social hierarchy, and we're kind of able to peek into that and take a closer look. Another kind of theme I wanted to focus on was just kind of the childhood ups and downs and disillusionment of the central character, Ravi. Ravi's principal priority is to be the winner of this game and defeat his cousins, especially Raghu, who is the seeker. He hides in the garage and the shed to show his power of will and urge to win and get all the glory. Because even if he is afraid of that dark place, he's still going to hide in there to win. And soon enough, he becomes confident that he's going to be successful when he's not caught for hours. But at the end, his victory is never even praised, and his existence was just forgotten. I mean, all of his siblings and cousins started playing without him. They completely forgot that he was still in the game. He wants to be noticed by his cousins and treated with importance, but the ending crushed his innocence partly and left him disheartened and disappointed. A chaotic hide-and-seek game basically turned into an unforgettable, bitter experience for Ravi, proving to him that no matter what you do, sometimes you're going to be overlooked, you're going to be overshadowed, forgotten. And at the end of the story, when Ravi kind of just like lays down on the ground, face down, he just doesn't talk or anything, it's kind of like he's being crushed by his own insignificance. And it's like this just great truth has just came like falling on top of him. And so it is a very interesting story. And at first you're like, I don't understand. Why does this matter so much? But I would say the main message of the story that the story tries to explain is it just tries to focus on the various emotional facets of childhood, from family rivalries to the importance of winning and self-esteem. Ravi is the kind of child who would take a Twilight game seriously and end up being disillusioned. So while to some it might seem just like a stupid game, like for Raghu or Mira, they probably were like, okay, it's just a simple game of hide and seek. But this is just another opportunity for Ravi to kind of finally prove himself. And so he's just frustrated that no matter what he does, all of his efforts seem to be in vain. Now, I really hope you guys enjoy this story, and please comment down below which short story you would like to hear next.